So that being said, we're going to get started. This webinar about gender and social equality was scheduled for the 10th of March, not by chance, but we wanted to schedule it as close as possible to the 8th of March, a date in which we commemorate the International Women's Day, which this year is dealing with rights, justice, and action for all women and girls. And we'd like to start by bringing the UN Women's Reflection for this year, remembering that to date, no country has closed the structural or legal gaps between men and women. And if there is legislation, efforts of civil society, and these have been recognized and they exist, the gaps still have not been closed. Only 64% of women enjoy the same legal rights as their male peers, such as work, right to work, money, safety, family, property, mobility, etc. We're all called to action to deal with these structural gaps. And from our initiative, 20 by 20, the coalition that gathers us here today, this is not a foreign concept to us. We'd like to remind you who we are at 20 by 20, because you who are participating of this webinar are also part of it. The initiative is a coalition of 15 governments and 136 technical partners and 32 financial partners that are united to promote the restoration of landscapes in Latin America and the Caribbean and to mobilize resources for that. And when we talk about the restoration of landscapes, we talk about it in the largest sense of the word, not just in logistical senses, but also in the social, cultural, and political sense of what that might mean. And looking for governance that is just and participative. In last year, in our yearly meeting, and I'm happy to see René Zamora, our old director, connected. Who the current director is now Alejandra Laina. But last year, we were able to map out what actions were and where our technical partners and financial partners were working. So we generated this simplified map where we can see a wide display of restoration actions that show on-field participation and a great joint work that facilitate restoration throughout the territories. In this map, the work of our secretary, which is in the World Resources Institute, is to gather, to coordinate, and to provide technical assistance for the key aspects that are needed in our region. To order our work between 2024 and 2025, we created participatively the new strategy for this initiative, which has 4 pillars: politics, policy, knowledge, private financing, and social and gender equality. We're not going to go into detail here because we want to have the time to delve deeper into gender and social equality. But if you'd like to learn more about our strategy, you can download it in this QR code. And we'd like to make an emphasis on 2 things. So to date, we have committed to facilitating conditions and to ground this in policies and recommendations and technical recommendations. And for this, we had to think strategically how the 20 by 20 initiative was going to deal with the issue of gender equality. And so that it would be profound and truly transformative and not something that is just surface level or dealt with lightly and that it's not delved into deeply. This is how we designed a roadmap that started from identification and mapping, that was participative, to start grounding this in technical and policy recommendations that would be structured. This work was done at the end of 2024 through an online mapping with very few resources. And along the way, we advanced towards a conceptual alignment and towards a gathering of what the situation in terms of gender and social equality was in the restoration sector in these countries. And I'm very pleased to see some of the people that participated in this roadmap, in this participative roadmap. Many of the technical partners collaborated towards creating a first draft of this constellation of partners that committed themselves and provided their knowledge and experience to provide the basis for this pillar of gender and social equality. Thanks to their participation, interviews, in different participative actions, we were able to condense information and to understand what's happening in terms of gender and social equality in restoration in Latin America. We were able to organize between August and September of last year a series of thematic webinars, which, similar to these webinars, they are available, their recordings are available online if you would like to learn more about them. We worked from a conceptual alignment, advancing towards understanding what are the barriers that women and youth and indigenous communities face when the restoration is being implemented. And finally, we analyze what strategies that as partners of 20 by 20 we can implement to face these barriers. Finally, we arrived at something that we're going to delve deeper into in terms of monitoring, which is to share what tools we use, which is something we're going to do today. And thanks to the financial support of the government of Luxembourg, we were able to gather some of the people who are here and representatives of the 20 by 20 initiative. We were able to gather in person, in which we were able to share our experiences and share and create a collective dialogue that was pretty exhaustive about why women still face barriers in terms of policies, in terms of finances, in terms of access to data, and in terms of governance. And this collective space in which the 20 by 20 network was present in these 4 days of work, we produced this result. We're still fine-tuning it, but as 20 by 20, we were able to create a roadmap that is very exhaustive and congruent with the rest of the 20 by 20 strategy, and a roadmap that indicates how we can move forward as a strategy. We might continue talking and sharing this throughout the year, the roadmap, but we'd like to mention this at the beginning, to mention that as 20 by 20, we're not just conscious and aware that gender and social equality is a commitment that we have to undertake, but also a duty that we have to undertake. This is not just an opportunity to repair our ecosystems, but also to heal our society and to move forward in rights, justice, and action. Not just restore ecosystems, but also our society. There's a lot to talk about around this issue and many narratives to share and to continue strengthening. And for that, I'll leave you in the hands of my friend and colleague and a woman that I admire very much, Maria Inés Miranda. She's from Chile, and she will share part of what we discovered last year. Thank you so much, Natalia. I also share this joy of working together with you and this challenge of including gender equality and social equality in restoration processes. First of all, I want to make sure that you can see my presentation. Yes. So Natalia's invitation today was to talk about the true impact of gender equality in landscape restoration beyond numbers. Because we're facing this challenge, how to involve more women and how to measure that participation in restoration processes through indicators. But we know that numbers don't tell the story of what truly happens on field. So we have to go deeper and finer into what's happening. So first of all, from last year's experience in all of these webinars that Natalia mentioned, with the opportunity to share in person in Lima with a group of people and professionals that are working and learning from restoration, we have the certainty that women are participating or have been participating in the transformation of territories for a long time. And through these restoration processes, landscape restoration and social restoration also comes through. So rural women, indigenous leaders, and youth are promoting restoration in Latin America and the Caribbean. However, we can also see that their impact is blocked by deep structural limitations, such as, just a few lack of access to land, economical exclusion, and barriers in decision making. These are fundamental issues in order to have an impact on the territory. So the mandate that comes forth from this is how to scale this impact, and how scaling that requires a technical accompaniment, technical, political, and financial accompaniment. And which is what we're going to see further, how to get to this new accelerator for gender and social equality in 20 by 20. And I also wanted to mention that the inequalities that we are identifying, we can see this image that shows how access to land ownership, decision making, and economical opportunities, this does have a numerical representation. That we can see in terms of numbers. But only counting and measuring in this way hides from us what is really happening in the territories and what is really happening there. What happens is that we see a number that we think explains the situation, and we want to find symbolic ways. And while these ways of interpreting are often well-intentioned, they don't show the truth. So only measuring how many women are present in certain processes, such as trainings, to meet a quota does not solve the base problem. So in that situation, the result is that inclusion is limited to superficial actions that leave the structural barriers underneath that intact. So it hides the truth, and only looking at the very generic numbers creates a risk of instrumentalization, creates a false illusion of impact, and it leaves intact these invisible power dynamics. We've also learned that many of these processes don't even measure anything. they're only focused on doing activities, on advancing, but not on actually solving issues. So in a collective learning exercise, this was carried out with our financial partners on a workday in person. This lasted 3 days. We analyzed this aspect of going from metrics to transformation, taking the iceberg as a kind of symbol. And this is identifying levels going from the most visible symptoms to the most invisible, deeper symptoms. Many of the most visible metrics fail when we only look at them and don't go into the deeper reasons. So here, the top of the iceberg is level 1. So these are the visible symptoms. This is what traditional indicators measure. The illusion of inclusion and superficial results. Level 2 is when we start looking at direct barriers that might exist in terms of policies, governance, and economic barriers that might prevent real participation for women. And if we go even deeper, and the hardest one to deal with are the mental models. This is the depth. This is the cultural root, the beliefs, the biases that we have around the participation of women. These are biases and power dynamics that, strengthen inequality. So at level 1, we always find a structural barrier, but even deeper at the bottom, we'll find the barrier of mental models, which are the hardest ones to change. And when we're at the tip of the iceberg, for example, we have participation in a training. So how many women participated and went to this training? So what's the truth? If we invite these women to the trainings, the truth is, the real is that they are in a situation of exhaustion. Because they face all these other challenges and all these other tasks that they have to do that are not remunerated or recognized. For example, in the Amazon region, where women are forced to be sitting on the ground during assemblies or during trainings, that might be a barrier, or because the trainings are in Spanish and they're not as comfortable with Spanish. So these are barriers. So the tip of the iceberg is women have to receive trainings, but in reality, this might be very different. Another example is that women have to be included in the productive chain, in the chain of production, but very often women are relegated to secondary roles. And this view that women are excellent for fine motricity, fine motor skills, and they do crafts and things, but are not allowed to participate in financial management or commercial and technical management of projects. So the myth is, let's include them in the chain of production, but the truth is something different. And this is very different from what it should do. If we go to the second level of the iceberg, we will find these blocks that are well known, such as the insecurity in terms of land ownership. So since women don't own the land, they don't qualify as subjects for incentive programs because they don't have the titles or the deeds, the formal land ownership. There's also lack of safeguards that are designed. These safeguards are often designed without a gender approach. There's also centralized governance that exclude women from organizations that are decision makers and instrumentalizing them in their participation only to meet quotas. We see this also often in the organizations that support the people on field, and also institutional disconnection. The agendas of environmentalism and gender and the rights of the indigenous peoples often operate in silos and often isolated from each other, and they don't coordinate with each other to deal with the kind of the intersectionality of what these issues should be dealt with. In terms of financing and knowledge, the economic model, the current economic and academic model, undervalues ancestral knowledge. So there's also financial exclusion. Often women don't receive this kind of education or are not eligible for many reasons. So there's a great barrier right there. In the invisibilization of local knowledge, not giving the true, in not giving the same value to local knowledge as to this more academic knowledge or more institutionalized knowledge. It disconnects the ancestral knowledges that could very potentially promote restoration. And logistical barriers in terms of distances, access to language. And if we go to the bottom of the iceberg, these are the ones that are hardest to transform and that go from the base of the structure that guides us afterwards. We saw many cases of normalization of violence on field in these territories. Is a very serious problem that is handled by ministries of gender or ministries of women in the government, but don't dialogue with organizations often. Also, undervaluing care work. This care economy is not valued or recognized, even when women participate heavily in these tasks, and thus women are excluded. There's also the imposter syndrome, which is, heavily felt by women, in which society judges female leadership often, qualifying them as bossy, dominating when they lead. And in terms of rigid economic roles, there's this paradigm that men are kind of the businessmen, the one that handle resources and serious matters, minimizing the capacity of women to be involved. But here the question is how we can transform, how we can create a transformation from passive assistance, which we have named already, such as economic exclusion, going from passive assistance to economic autonomy. We have to evaluate the quality and not so much the quantity of impact. So counting the number of women should change into a power of impact to rather describe how that woman's life changed. Was she able to change her income, to increase her economic capacity, to strengthen her decision-making ability in the home? That's what we want to measure. And also how we can visualize care work and power dynamics. So restoration processes have to go beyond numbers and be able to evaluate the true redistribution of roles, especially. So is this restoration process really redistributing roles and visibilizing non-remunerated work? So this will allow us to create effective change in power dynamics. And in this context, 20 by 20 initiative, in its gender equality, gender and social equality, promotes a new paradigm for capturing and understanding social complexity. So these indicators have to be associated with an integrated monitoring system, understanding the complexity and the different levels of depth that these barriers involve that were identified in the study that was carried out last year that Natalia kind of helped lead and which will be available in the future. So we're redefining the measurement of success. To evaluate the true quality of impact, we need to overcome the simple measurement of the number of participants. This requires an intersectional approach with indicators that show changes in power dynamics at the economic level and at the legal infrastructure level, not just in terms of assistance or how many women were benefited from one or another program. So this new monitoring system promoted by the pillar of gender and social equality has 3 levels. There's an organizational level, which has to do with policy implementation at an internal level for the technical team that supports these projects. So these teams also have to have the same level of gender and social inclusion. It also has a community landscape level, which is the degree of female leadership, economical autonomy levels, and equal access to benefits in restoration. And there's another level in terms of facilitating conditions, such as changes in legal frameworks, creating more intersectional or policies that intersect in terms of public policy, and financial level with gender approach. So measuring impact from inside towards the territory, the transformation has to start in the internal structures of the organizations that are supporting these processes of equity, and then that is reflected in the landscape. So at the organizational level, there has to be practices that through adequate monitoring can actually measure the impact in terms of the redistribution of power and benefits in the territory. For this, there are facilitating conditions. So long-term success requires a favorable ecosystem. We have to evaluate legal frameworks and the mechanisms for financing that should have a gender focus. In a complementary way, participative methodologies. So research shows that these approaches should also go with research that is participative. Also, creating safe spaces for listening is also facilitating conditions so that women can truly participate and can truly contribute, and understanding the human context beyond what numbers reveal. In that context, the path towards the GES accelerators is technical accompaniment, expanding diagnostic tools and organizational tools, policy accompaniment, so having an impact, advocacy and legal frameworks, and creating facilitating conditions, and then financial accompaniment as well. In just one image, we have the career, we have the map, the road that we've classified. We have a strategy for transformation, and a very important pillar that is measuring real impact through indicators that should truly show the improvement and not just talk about numbers. And finally, just to say that the final objective is not just to measure better, but to achieve a genuine cultural transformation. It's a marathon, and it requires a deep qualitative monitoring. And what we want is to truly promote a long-lasting transformation towards equality. And so I'd like with this to stimulate the interest towards looking at what truly happens behind the numbers, and to seeing the stories that are behind those indicators and how these indicators can tell the story. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Maria Inés, for condensing and for presenting so creatively and so graphically all of these ideas that we started to articulate since the 2024 and that we're structuring from 20 by 20. We are committed to sharing the information publicly that we are condensing. So far, we've only been able to share the contents of the webinars from last year. We hope before the middle of this year to present the report of what we worked on in the third quarter of last year. And after being peer reviewed, the full study. So these little syntheses are starting to be shared and publicized. After this presentation, we're going to go to Carmen Morales, who is talking to us from Spain and is bringing us a very strong message and tools. But before going over to Carmen, I wanted to say that one of the advantages of working online is that we're not alone, and that the tools that we use and the topics that we prioritize are shared. Maria Inés shared that her presentation saying that the levels of work are different from organizational issues levels towards local levels towards global levels. And that's what Carmen is going to talk to us about. In the global gender and social equality agenda for restoration, all of these elements are beginning to be integrated. How are they integrated and through what tools? That's what Carmen is going to talk to us about. Thank you so much, Natalia. And Maria Inés, congratulations. I loved the presentation. It was very interesting. We learned so much listening to these presentations. So I want to make sure that you can see my presentation. Are you seeing it full screen? Yes, we can see it now. All right. First of all, I'm Carmen Morales. I work in the FAO, which is the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, and I work in the Forest Division. We have a work group that works on the monitoring of ecosystem restoration. Along with some other organizations, we've created a work team to work on restoration. And through a program, we are supporting some pilot programs, which are in Brazil, and we are trying to meet Objective 2 from the framework. We're working on Objective 2, the restoration of the 30% of ecosystems. That's the main indicator in terms of area of restoration. And we're also supporting are trying to reach all of the countries in Latin America and create a regional subcenter. And we have the Humboldt Center in Colombia, and that's a sub-regional support hub for this program. So I'll talk a bit about the context, about the Kunming-Montreal framework, and landing in this framework for the restoration of ecosystems, or framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring, the FERM. And, dealing with this with a gender and social equality approach. So I hope this is interesting for everyone here. So I'll start with a presentation. I'd like to highlight, first of all, that our team, and I'm very proud to be able to say it, is that we have a team with a great deal of female leadership. This is a screenshot from a meeting that we had last week, and this says a lot. In any case, a few years ago, this wouldn't have been possible. And to highlight that we are 2/3 of the team is composed of women and 1/3 men. So, and a few years ago, this would not have been possible. And also to highlight that in the FAO, in the UN, FAO UN, which is the organization that I have been working for several years, that exists since the end of World War II, there have been 10 general directors, and they have all been men. And so it would be really great if that could change as well. And in the forest division, in the forest sector, it has traditionally been led by men. And right now it's being led by a man. But there are a lot of positions with a lot of responsibility within that division that are led by women. So, like this team for the ecosystem restoration monitoring, which is being led by a woman. So I wanted to highlight this. I think this is interesting to place it kind of in context. And this is what I was presenting at the beginning of the presentation. We have the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Global Framework, which was approved in COP15 in 2021, and it has 23 goals. And goal 2 is to restore 30% of all degraded ecosystems. And here we're talking about all possible ecosystems. This can be land ecosystems, coastal ecosystems, water ecosystems. And the objective is to improve biodiversity, the functions and services of these ecosystems, integrity, and ecological connectivity. So now, from the expected results, men and women relate differently to biodiversity and with the cultures and ecosystem services. So the indicators that can measure these results could have a gender approach, could be irrelevant to them. This is the first slide that I wanted to show. And these cycles for biodiversity, we had the 7th national reports to the CBD, which report what has been achieved in terms of these goals that we mentioned before. These numbers are very recent. Our team carried out a very quick analysis last week, but basically 112 countries have presented their 7th national reports, and of these, 52 have presented data on the main indicator for objective 2, which is area in terms of restoration, or areas that are in process of restoration. So this has advanced quite a bit in terms of this objective, and we are very happy that these countries have presented so much information. And I think this slide is very interesting. So the analysis, the object of analysis here is a relationship between all of the objectives. So there are 23 objectives in total. So objectives from 1 to 13 that have to do with several issues. Goal 1 has to do with spatial planning. Goal 2 is the areas in process of restoration. 3 is protected areas. 4 is threatened species. These are all very related between each other, and they support each other mutually with objective 2, but we also know that objective 23 is the one that's related to gender equality. And it is also supporting directly objective 2. So objective 2 and objective 23 support each other's mutually as well. And, we can see this superficially. Restoration processes with gender approaches can create more opportunities for women and children. So objective 2 supports objective 23, and objective 23 can support objective 2 because it guarantees equality of opportunities. Guaranteeing equality of opportunities for women and children and other groups also supports the process of restoration. So this relationship between the different objectives is interesting to see. So now I'm going to go to see what this framework for ecosystem restoration monitoring, in terms of providing tools to monitor the progress of achievements in terms of restoration. So this goes from 2021, when this framework was approved, until 2030. So this measures or monitors restoration within that time framework. So we can register restoration initiatives and also good practices or best practices. And I'll show you where you can look up these initiatives and good practices and which ones have a gender approach. It also has a geospatial tool to visualize restoration areas. And it has a dashboard, which is, to review data, to gather all the data that has been gathered, that has been registered in this framework. In order to report on these areas that are in the process of restoration. So we can take a look at this data revision, which kind of harmonizes all the information in terms of data at a national level. And it's directly linked with the reporting tool on the Biodiversity Convention. And countries can access this database and directly report towards goal 2. We also, as I mentioned before, there's a registry where restoration parameters, according to the methodology for goal 2 or objective 2, are included. These parameters include disaggregation in terms of area for indigenous communities. That's one of the parameters that we recommend disaggregating. Then we also have a search tool and a geospatial tool. What is FERM based on? What are the principles that we have based ourselves on to develop these tools? So in first place, we have the shared definition of restoration, which includes different types of restoration, from rehabilitation to remediation and passing through ecological restoration. So these are different types of restorations that are included. It also differentiates restoration from natural ecosystems towards from productive ecosystems or transformed ecosystems. It uses the types of ecosystems that are recommended for disaggregation with regards to objective 2 that is recommended by SER. In terms of, it can also measure indicators according to a framework that I'm going to present now, that was developed by WRI and the FAO. And this is a tool that intends to help stakeholders to create a monitoring system that is adapted to the needs of each project, to identify which key indicators are needed to identify the progress towards the objectives that have been identified. And this Aurora tool is included in the FERM. I'm going to go a little bit in detail into what are the parameters or the subjects and indicators that can be measured. And some of these are focused on benefits for women and minorities. So these subjects are varied. We have more biophysical subjects that have to do with biodiversity, with water, soil, weather, that are more related towards connectivity, connection between habitats, energy, amount of fuel, quantity and management, soil use. And then when we go more towards culture and community, we have 3 sub-subjects, which are income, equality, and health. And when we go to equality, we have an indicator that is benefits for women and minorities from these restoration activities. One of the examples that we have in order to understand more in depth what are the benefits of ecosystem restoration for women or for men is the production of forest products that are non-wood, non-lumber wood forest products. So this could potentially help the economy of women in the household highly. And these are pretty typical, but they can say a lot. Reduction of workload, for example, in domestic work, that is linked to water, that is linked to women. Or the reduction of workload that is linked to energy and power. These could be measured and could show how these restoration activities or how these restoration results can have benefits in some cases for women. This depends on the context, on the project. These indicators could be measured. And the rest of the other parameters can also be interpretive. So percentage of perception of safety in terms of land ownership. So if we're answering this in terms of women, this could also be different, right? Because if we're differentiating this between men and women, men might perceive this as more stable as women, which is generally what happens. So these are things, these are some examples of the parameters that this Aurora framework takes into account, which is an example of research between two organizations, which in this case are the FAO of the UN and WRI, which identified some indicators and systems to better measure from a more integral perspective landscape restoration. This is one of the frameworks we can use to measure ecosystem restoration and to monitor it within the FERM. And we have the possibility for users to upload information and the indicators that they consider pertinent. So there's a possibility that users can identify the indicator that they want to measure, the index they want to measure, and then they can, those indicators, those indexes can be shown as well. When I'm doing the demonstration, I'll show a few examples that we can use. So now I wanted to go to the impact of FERM up to now. This has to do with interoperable frameworks with collaboration efforts. For example, some organizations such as WOCAT, Panorama, GoPro4 have spent many years gathering information about ecosystem and landscape restoration, in which these practices can be accessed in FERM, which is the centralized database. So the Society for Ecological Restoration has been gathering information on restoration activities for a long time, and these can be accessed through the tool, in the search tool. But a user can also register their own restoration initiative or their own practice and then publish it. So both for initiatives that are registered as well as for good practices, there are evaluation criteria. And these are derived from the 10 principles that were established at the beginning of the decade for ecosystem restoration. We have some that have relevance for gender and social equality. For example, number 2, it's very important in all steps of restoration, from design to implementation to monitoring, that it is participative and inclusive in the whole process. On another hand, we want to make sure that Principle 7, that talks about contributing to ecological objectives, cultural objectives, and socioeconomical objectives in the restoration initiative. And so here we can talk about gender and social equality. And then in 6, it says it has to integrate different types of knowledge. So here we can integrate scientific knowledge, but we can also integrate local knowledge from indigenous communities, from agricultural, from farmers, agricultural producers. And so these are some of the principles that are taken into account when we evaluate the initiatives. That we can find in FERM. The framework also has a database, a geospatial database that can, the idea is to create a global map that shows restoration areas and maybe shows some practices so that we can find more information with a geospatial point of view. So one of our colleagues here that is listening, that's part of the team, Jasmine, has been working on this tool, on this geospatial tool, and we have some socioeconomic indicators that are disaggregated in layers. And so we can view them in layers. And so I'll show you where you can find this platform, with regards to the routes and tools that have been developed since the decade for restoration, for landscape restoration in 2021 started. We have some guides and tools around FERM. There is a part here that talks about facilitating conditions. That there are some questions there that are specific towards gender and social equality, and we can find everything that's on the resource guide for objective 2, for target 2, to better implement landscape restoration and to monitor it. And we have kind of thematic orientations. So for example, how to monitor restoration of ecosystems and implement them in terms of continental waters that are perhaps less studied than land ecosystems. And so these were the slides that I wanted to share before I finish. I'd like to make a demonstration of the tool. Can you see the website? Yes, we see it. All right, so this is the tool that I showed you, that I was talking about before. So here you can see the registry, the record, and you can register your restoration and good practices initiatives. Here's where you can visualize geospatially. You can take a look at the map. That's the geospatial tool. And you can see the different socioeconomical layers here that have a gender differentiation there that can be useful, that we can perhaps integrate better in that sense. And then there's the search tool, which is what I'm going to show today, so we don't have that much time. I want to show some examples. First of all, I want to show how they work. So here on the left, we have some filters for different initiatives. So we can, filter by region, by ecosystem. We can filter by font, by source. So one of the sources we've added recently is the Acción Andina initiative, which is a restoration platform and monitoring platform that's very complete, very developed. It has a lot of information. That platform is now interoperable with FERM. So we can access these through the FERM now. So if we go to an example, for example, we can see the complete initiative. So this redirects us to their platform, which is called Restoration Scope, and which has many restoration projects that are documented with geospatial information and details on the species that have been planted, etc. Up to now, up to date, so far we don't have socioeconomic indicators for this one. But at some point, we would like to include. So here you can see that women have been involved in these restoration activities. So some details with regard to gender and social gender approach. With regards to good practices, you can go to languages. We have good practice in English, French, and Spanish, not just English. I wanted to show one that's in Brazil. And it's interesting because it has been led by this, it's called Muvuka. And we can see this, you can select it and you can find out more details about it. So this good practice can be understood when you read the details that this is in Brazil, in which seeds have been gathered and has been directed by women. And 80% of the gatherers in this initiative were women. And in the search tool for FERM, you can perhaps put in the term woman or gender perspective. And so you can find good practices that are led by women. So for example, here we have another example in India that's called Argila Army. Which are women that have led restoration initiatives. And you can find all the details here. We have several good practices. So if you want to find this type of information or carry out a study on restoration initiatives that have been led by women or that have indicators that are related to gender, I think I'm going to leave it here and stop here so that there's enough time for questions. I will stop sharing. All right. Thank you so much, Carmen. I think we have all learned a lot from your presentation with regards to the level of advancement that the decade has provided for ecosystem restoration. That I must say, I have looked closely at the tremendous work carried out by the FAO so that these tools are available and are available at least in the main languages and can be used by everyone, not just by governments, but also by local organizations. And so that they are not just a tool for monitoring and for meeting targets, but to share information. So thank you for sharing them with us, for this effort to understand where they came from. We have a bit of time for questions. And I'll ask Carmen, they're asking us in the chat if you can share the main links for these tools so that people can share them and perhaps, copy and paste them in a note block or in a Word document that you might use. We have an interesting exchange in the chat. I've myself have been able to share some tools and some experiences there. And I'm condensing a bit in order to direct or guide a question for Maria Inés. So Ellie left already, but left us a question. So these icebergs that you presented in your presentation, can we understand them only as a route from bottom up, or can they also be understood from the top to the bottom? So do we necessarily have to change mental structures in order to change the more superficial structures, or can the opposite also happen? Can we change some of the more superficial things to change mentalities? So the iceberg is not just an image of the problem. It's a back and forth circuit. It's a two-way circuit. So we change mentalities to redesign structures, and these structures would hopefully have a visible status in the territory, but you also change these structures to change mentalities. If we only worked at the tip of the iceberg, only on the visible, the coordination between the structure and the things that give us that sustain us, we wouldn't change anything. So we have to intervene simultaneously in the mental models that are at the bottom, in the rules, the financing policies. So changes in mentality, we have seen that they have a huge impact. You might remember Me Too, how this global situation, just verbalizing that abuse and exposing it, all these situations that are no longer comfortable for us, they have been reflected in structural changes as well. So certainly society has, in the same way that society evolves in thought and in mentality, this also changes structures. So I do think it's a back and forth process in which we can't just intervene in the surface level. We need to change mentalities in order to change structures as well. So to answer the question, yes, it is a two-way road. So thank you Maria Inés, thank you also Carmen, who shared us the links for the tools that she was showing us that are useful not just for identifying initiatives that have a gender perspective, but also initiatives that are being used in our region for restoration. There were some questions about where we can find these experiences. Carmen has shown us a platform. We also, in our study that we are going to be published this year, we made a brief mapping within the 20 by 20 initiative, and we will publish that this year. I don't think anyone from UISN is here, which is working on a platform for recognition that should be available next year. So yes, there are different search tools. There's the Restore platform, which compiles and is participative, in which some people upload information about their restoration initiatives. So that's one of the challenges that we have, is that information is disaggregated. Oh, we do have a colleague here from IUCN Sur. So perhaps you can write a little bit more about this initiative that's being built in terms of this platform that you're working on. Maybe you can write a bit more in the chat. It's that platform is going to be for some Latin American countries at first, but we hope that it scales up later. So through the 20 by 20 initiative, you will be able to find some, but it's not all of these tools. So working within the FERM framework is to continue working on integrating these platforms. So if we don't have any more questions in the chat, and it being exactly the time that we committed, 1 hour, 15 minutes, I'd like to thank the over 60 people that are still connected. Some people had to leave in the way. And I'd also like to especially thank the two women that spoke here today, Maria Inés Miranda and Carmen Morales, who from Chile and from Spain have brought us these tools, analyses, and reflections. Thank you very much, and see you soon.